Welcome to SBI's GTM Value Creation Corner podcast with SBI CEO Mike Hoffman hosting. Each episode is an unscripted conversation between Mike and a GTM leader, expert, or practitioner about what's on the minds of executives, latest market trends, and SBI research and insights. In this episode, we continue the conversation with Nick Toman, SBI Chief Strategy and Product Officer, to uncover the key talent phenotypes that are vital to GTM success and the role of generative AI in the future of sales.
All right. And is there a role, it sounds like you're hinting at this, and I know this is, we don't like to play on the big hot trends and everything else, but this does beg the question of, is there a place for generative AI and machine learning in identifying the right profiles for salespeople?
Yeah. If I said no, it would be totally shocking, right? So, I think the potential for generative AI to change so much of what we do, I mean, it's massive. We all know this. I'm not going to, make some sweeping statement about this, but what we're doing now is applying generative AI and machine learning to some of the data sets that we're amassing. And we're finding some really interesting things, Mike. We're running a series of experiments with a professor at Harvard, professor of economics and econometrics at Harvard. And in some of these kind of proof of concept tests, we're finding some really interesting data points around not just what competencies and behaviors drive effectiveness, Mike, but with the advent of generative AI, machine learning, large language models, we can go out and do a series of analyses where we're able to scrape like LinkedIn profiles. We're able to incorporate HR data. We're able to incorporate, we do a lot of 360 analysis on sales teams where we're talking to their sales managers, we're talking to their peers, and we're able to bring that unstructured data into the fold. So in addition to some of our sort of standard analyses that we run, we're able to now factor in a tremendous amount of data. And, through the course of some really interesting machine learning, understand what really does drive effectiveness, what is the ideal phenotype to go out and use for hiring. And candidly, Mike, we're seeing some really interesting outcomes from these experiments where, with north of 90% certainty, we can identify good candidates for a role coming in and going through a hiring process. We can also identify individuals who are ripe and will succeed from a promotion standpoint. So moving kind of reps into managerial roles or moving sales engineers into sales engineer management roles, all sorts of interesting things we're seeing from this. But the data is out there now. The capability to do this really easily and model this without having to hire a massive data scientist team, it's there. And it's something we're now bringing into this talent map and the products we're launching.
Nick, do you have a couple of nuggets you can share from what AI has uncovered in some larger sales organizations?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked. And I will always sort of disclose, this is the sort of lifelong researcher in me that this, I'll run through a few different data points. Literally came in last week. We just ran 800 sellers from one organization through a machine learning exercise. And here's a few things. So this was this one organization. I'm not going to divulge the client, obviously. This is this one organization, but this is the type of insight you can glean from doing this sort of analysis. One is you literally can't pay enough for tenure in this one client found for tenure of your sales reps. And they found, Mike, tenure for them really did drive effectiveness, particularly industry tenure. What they found is that kind of 2 to 4 years of tenure, if you're paying for 2 to 4 years of added tenure within their business or experience in the market, broadly speaking, don't pay a premium for that talent. It's not enough tenure. But when you get beyond 5 years, what we were finding is 36% higher quota attainment for 5+ years. And literally, when you look at the pay differential, it was fairly marginal relative to the quota attained. And what it tells us, economically speaking, is go pay more for highly tenured talent within that one sector. Now, for those listening, for those watching, that may not be the case for your company, but it was for this organization. And that's what we mean when we get into real details around machine learning. We can identify this. Another one, they found this was really interesting. Don't pay for education. So if someone comes in with more of a pedigreed degree, don't pay for that education. Be really cautious in doing that. Competency wise, this is kind of interesting. What we found from the ideal called phenotype, and I've used that word.
I just have to make a comment on that.
Yeah.
But again, this is for this particular organization, but you feel bad for all those people who paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for their education, thinking it would get them a better sales job.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and look, we do see a big push towards more pedigreed universities with the assumption that, well, then they must have more business acumen. They've got an MBA. They must be able to deliver. Be really careful. We did not find that to be powerful. And so, Mike, here's this ideal phenotype. Like I said, I mentioned this word a couple times. For those who aren't familiar with what that word means, really just think of it as sort of like a collection of attributes that define people that you can kind of go look for, hire. And it almost like an archetype is how I think about it. But what we found for this organization, 5+ years of experience, 3 to 5 years of experience within their company. Okay. So it didn't need to be in a commercial role, but they knew the company, they knew the product set. And they had very high levels of competence in negotiating, generating referrals, and utilizing marketing programs. Right. And so those are 3 competencies, which on the surface, you're going, do those sound like the right ones? But for this particular company, it makes a heck of a lot of sense. They're really good very early in the process of generating referrals and using that to build pipe. They're very good late in terms of negotiating and closing deals with mastery. They're really good at leveraging marketing programs and putting really good thought leadership in front of the customers and using that to help the customer navigate the purchase process. And that's what we found for this organization, drove very significant gains in quota attainment.
So wait, any pause there.
Yeah.
So the punchline on this for everybody who's listening is somewhere in the data associated with the team that you have in the field, there are competencies and skills that matter most. And if you're able to find those, you can quickly go, we're going to train on these skills that are trainable, and we're going to recruit to these competencies, and we're going to coach to these competencies that are coachable. And you should be able to move the needle across your entire sales organization. And we're going to unload the people who have things that are, uncoachable competencies that they just don't have. That's the punchline.
Absolutely. And we've taken the world of sort of all the attributes that you could possibly look at from talent. We've kind of codified it, and you can identify just a handful of things you really go operate against right now, to your point, Mike. These are the things, just the sort of brute economist in me gets excited around this kind of stuff, because it's like, look, ignore all the other noise, ignore all the other distraction. These 3, 4, 5 things are what matter most. Let's get focused on these things, and it will in fact move the needle in a differentiated way. Like, that gets me extremely excited, and helping bring that level of clarity and focus to leadership teams. This is exactly what we need to be doing right now.
All right, so I'm going to do a bonus round thing right now because we're running out of time. So you just talked about how you can leverage AI and machine learning for good. And we know if you go through all of history, everything that it was invented for good reasons could be used for bad. So how are organizations misusing generative AI right now and in some cases, let's keep on the talent front, to cover up some talent deficiencies that they have?
Yeah.
And I know you just had an article published in Harvard Business Review on this. So.
Yeah, we just wrote a piece. It's, the sort of punchline of that generative AI piece we put in HBR, Mike, was be careful treating generative AI as a sweeping new capability that's going to deliver all sorts of information to the front line and make them all that much smarter and more efficient in their role. We think that day and that era will likely come. It's probably not in 2024. We just don't think the tools have been sort of harnessed and put into the right use cases. And we're seeing all kinds of experimentation with things like, train your sellers on using generative AI prompts. And, here's a rigid set of prompts to go put into the chat engines, and you're going to get great things back. I think experimentation with some of that stuff is all well and good. What we're finding right now and what we're seeing is that the sellers who apply generative AI to deeply learn about the customer, deeply learn about what's happening within their business, what's happening within their industry. And, I kind of go back, Mike, to, almost the 5 whys of, I think Toyota made famous back in the 80s, but I'm really kind of applying the 5 whys to pieces of business they're pursuing to intimately understand the customer. I'll go back to this point around kind of empathy and really commercial empathy is what I call it, Mike. But they're able to really understand what's happening, why is it happening, what's the customer doing about it, what's going to be hard about that, what's at stake, and be that much sharper. The elusive commercial or business acumen that we've all been chasing with our sales teams for years and years and years, it's right there. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful use cases. And honestly, where I'd encourage the listeners to start with their sales teams is get your sales teams curious about the accounts they're working and using generative AI to explore those accounts in a way they've never been able to before.
That's good. One last thing, and I know you and I, we laughed when we heard this. So we were having a conversation with someone recently with, lots of credibility in the industry. And that person, she said to us, we're going back to 1985. And we paused for a moment and said, what do you mean by that? And she was so right. She said, the world has digital fatigue. We used Zoom during 2020, and that became a popular way to make sales calls because we had to, because we couldn't leave our houses. Yeah. People are dying for human contact right now. And so that human contact, now how does this affect, and does it have an impact on how we recruit talent, thinking we might have to go back outside? So any thoughts or comments on that? I know you and I both had a chuckle.
Yeah. No, it was, we were joking about this. Maybe we need to reinsert the line item for company cars back into our operating expenses. But look, I think outside sales became like I don't remember the last time I heard the word outside sales. And then you kind of stopped hearing inside sales because everybody was inside sales, and we all started doing virtual selling again. There was a host of studies on the heels of COVID to show the effectiveness of selling in virtual channels. Well, that's pretty easy to show effectiveness when everybody's selling that way and commerce is still happening. Like I sort of looked at those as like, okay, well, these are sort of flawed self-serving studies, and Mike, I think there's an opportunity to really look critically at what's happening to win rates, what's happening to deal size, and I will tell you anecdotally, I don't have data behind it. But anecdotally, we are seeing some huge differentiation for sales teams that are returning back to the field. Customers bought the wrong products virtually, product-led growth. They bought the wrong products. The retention rates would suggest, and we've all been struggling with retention, we didn't help qualify. We didn't get customers to the right product. We're paying the price, and customers know it too. They're more leery of what they're buying. Customer regret has never been higher. And I think there's a huge opportunity to get out there with customers, build trust back up the right way. And customers kind of want a throat to choke. I hate to say it, but they kind of do. And they want to look someone in the eyes and know this is right for my business. I've got confidence to move this thing forward. And you just can't always deliver that through a transactional virtual sales model or particularly a product-led model. I think there's a lot of, we need to show some real concern over those channels and make sure we're helping drive the level of trust and understanding in what we do through all these customer interaction points. And I think there's no better way than live. I hate to say it, Mike. I sound like an old man, but right. It's going to differentiate some teams out there. It really will.
Back to 1985. All right. So let me summarize a few things we covered here. So number one, put talent back on the forefront of what you're thinking about. It was, it feels like we have de-emphasized that. And when we're having conversations now with clients, they're saying, wow, talent, never really thought about that before. So that's number one. Number two, leverage tools and have a bunch of discipline around understanding what is the profile of the optimal salesperson within your organization. And there are tools and AI as a role in that. And really number three is, rethink how you're approaching your customer or prospect engagements now that there is a flavor of, I want human contact. And whether that's, it doesn't necessarily have to be outside salespeople like you had talked about, and maybe
Right.
does that make sense? But live events where you get face to face, because there is an element of trust that has to go into this, especially with the scrutiny that companies are putting on B2B purchases. Nobody wants to sit there and say, I made a misguided purchase. And so with that level of scrutiny, they want to know that the person, have a level of trust. And sometimes that only happens with face-to-face engagement. So I that would be the three big takeaways I have. I don't know if you've got anything else more.
Look, I think, Mike, it comes down to, it's kind of your first 2 points. I really do think, one, ask yourself, do you know what's driving excellence at a behavioral and talent level in your organization right now? Not speculation, but do you know it in a way that you can then quantify who has it and who doesn't have it? And if you can't answer those questions, this is the kind of stuff we've got to get focused on. And we're happy to help, but you've got to get focused on that right now. Being able to answer that, know who's got it, who doesn't, and what's my plan to get people to a point where they've got the right behaviors, they've got the right skills, they've got the right competencies. Train them, coach them, or performance manage them. You got to have the answers.
Yep. All right, and I'll leave it where we started for the group. If you need to move the needle in 2024, start with talent.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it, as always. Engaging conversation.
Yep. That was good.
You've been listening to SBI's GTM Value Creation Corner podcast with CEO Mike Hoffman hosting. Visit sbigrowth.com to read SBI's latest research, join upcoming events, or learn about SBI's GTM services. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and connect with us on LinkedIn.